Outspoken Western Cape police officer and anti-apartheid activist Jeremy Vearey has vowed to fight until the last drop of blood to claim the ANC back from what he calls new enemies at the gate who sold the party to the enemies within. Vearey was speaking last week at the funeral of ANC struggle stalwart Cecil Esau, whom he described as his mentor. According to Vearey, the enemy is corruption and those who profit from it, crime and those who profit from it, poverty and those who profit from it. He says all that degrades the equality of our freedom. Vearey, who is now a Major General in the South African Police Service, broke with tradition at Esau's funeral service to honour his mentor. He joins us now here in the midday view on ENCA to further unpack his views. Good afternoon, Sam. Thank you very much for your time. You had very strong words that you expressed when you were memorializing your mentor, the late Cecil Esau, last week at the funeral. Why did you feel it was necessary at this time to use that platform, you yourself, as an anti-apartheid activist, to express such strong views?
I think when I was speaking at the memorial, I was sharing the tradition, the revolutionary tradition we come from. Although the organization we served in, and we served in still till now, is the African National Congress, you need to understand the context of our involvement as community activists and later Umkhonto weSizwe cadres, in my case in particular, that comes from a tradition of serving the people first. And the organization is merely a vehicle through which to serve the revolutionary agenda of the people. At that stage, it was myself being a socialist, and so was Cecil. In that philosophy, in our particular approach, the quality of freedom insofar as it affects the livelihood and the material lives of the workers and the poor are fundamental to how you measure change. So you measure change by what you see in the difference it makes to the lives of people. Now, when I was talking about corruption and relating it to the quality of freedom, insofar as theft of public resources denies opportunities or denies the kind of funding that should be there for improving the quality of lives and the material life of the working class or the poor, for that matter, at all levels, whether it's housing, education, how crime affects them, etc. Insofar as that is still prevalent, it is still a problem. And the problem in this case with corruption is it taps on the resources unlawfully that needs to address these particular things. When I refer to the context of tribalism in relation to Cecil, now let me explain to you. It might sound bizarre to you, but given the tradition of activism Cecil and I came from in the Congress movement, even in the 80s, it was quite a shock to hear that coming out from Robben Island, most of us, in 1991, we suddenly rediscovered in the ANC and other places that people were calling us coloureds. We never saw ourselves in that particular way. We were not taught to see ourselves in that way, given the organization's non-racial edition. We were taught to respect different cultures in the movement, to give expression in the movement to whatever cultural backgrounds, whether that literary, be that whatever work that involved in that particular area in people's lives, and to suddenly come back and see a lot of that denied was quite a challenge for us. I'm not saying that it's the ANC did that, but I think that's one of the challenges of transformation, and the quality of the transformation, that it did not make a very large material difference, if I would say, despite having political freedom, to what I saw growing up in Elsie's River. I mean,
Now,
it's one thing having the vote, but if you still have the flats and you still have a housing problem and unemployment, there's very little to improve the quality of that freedom in those areas.
Now, Jeremy, you've mentioned a number of things that I'm hoping we could, in the short time we have, just try and get a more sense about them from you. Quality of freedom. This month of April, it's 27 years since the democratic elections of 1994, and yet there's a question around the quality of freedom. So that means the freedom is not at the right level. Am I correct to say so?
I would say the freedoms that affect the working class or the poor out there, is the type of the type of challenges that affect that freedom are those that deprives that of its rightful resources to correct its material well-being, to solve the housing problem, to deal with quality education, to deal with that. And if we have corruption at state level that diverts resources to private pockets over and above fulfilling the purpose that it was supposed to serve, now, it erodes the quality. Yes, that is so.
Yeah, so corruption at the center of that erosion. But you spoke about people selling out. You spoke about people selling out by, for example, you said the enemies are at the gates of those who sold the party to the enemies within. So the enemies of freedom are within the ANC.
Yes, the corrupt elements within the ANC, yes. And elsewhere outside in society.
So where is the ANC?
But I think when I came to crime...
Yeah, no, before crime, say... So where else is the ANC? How else is the ANC then failing? Is the leadership issue? Because it's now 27 years as a governing party and corruption is eroding the quality of freedom, as you said. And the enemies are within.
To me, it's not on a vanguard, the organization, that fails for that. It's the misconduct of certain, or counter-revolutionary conduct of certain elements that erode the organization from what it was. So to speak, because the organization is still a vehicle that unites our masses, that is able to galvanize our people for change. I don't think the enemies are few, and those that detract from that purpose through their various criminal behavior or alleged criminal behavior or corruption are people that can be dealt with by the organization. I don't think the organization is in a state where it's untransformable. Neither CIS will believe that, or me. I believe we've gone through challenges of corruption before. In 1969, I think it was highlighted by Comrade Chris Hani at the Morogoro Convention. So these things are not insurmountable. And the vehicle through which we're delivering this freedom has grown since then. So these phases, to me, require decisive action that needs to restore us back to what our ideals require us to be.
What does that decisive leadership look like today? What should it look like?
It's principled. There's a type of principled leadership that one saw in Sisiliso, or in Johnny Issel, in Oliver Tambo, in Alan Busa. The type of leadership that puts principle before profit, principle before private accumulation. That is the type of leadership that should lead. A type of servant leadership that goes back to what our core mission as revolutionaries are, and that is to serve the people.
To serve the people, and you today playing a role as a police officer. In your speech at the Cecil Esau commemoration, you mentioned that crime as well is the enemy and those who profit from it. I mean, how bad is crime from your view?
Let me explain it. I grew up in, explain it from this perspective. I grew up in Elsie's River, okay? where gangs are prevalent. Now, if you understand growing up in a place like Elsies River or Manenberg or any place on the Cape Flats, your freedom of movement is greatly curtailed by the presence of gangs. You cannot move in certain areas for fear of being seen to be part of another gang if you are a young person in the area where you reside. So it definitely affects your freedom, your right, your constitutional freedom of movement. You cannot wear what you wear freely for fear that you might be donning the colors of a gang unconsciously and find yourself in a difficult position because of that. You cannot go to church in one part of Elsies River because it's dominated by another gang that is not in the area that you come from. So it definitely affects your freedom of movement and a basic constitutional principle such as that. And to me, crime is more than just the physical harm it does, but the constitutional freedoms it affects and it curtails. And it needs to be tackled in that matter as an alternative form of criminal governance out there, much like we tackled the criminal governance of apartheid. So it's more than just what victims suffer. It's the quality of people's lives in those areas, the quality of the constitutional freedoms that are affected by crime that curtails their movement and their free association.
Now, finally, Jeremy, in that speech at the memorial commemoration for Cecil Esau, whom you described as a mentor, when I read what was reported, and you've confirmed some of that now in our discussion, it seems to me that you are angry, you are also a little bit frustrated as a member, and you want to see something different. Are you hopeful that the ANC of today can find that caliber of decisive leadership and principled leadership of the likes of O.R. Tambo that you've mentioned to change for better into the future?
Firstly, revolutionaries are never angry. We see these contradictions that exist now as natural to the development in the struggle for liberation. So we always understood that we have different class interests, different interest groups, different political schools within the ANC, and we all understood that at some point these contradictions will surface in the way they do. We were, after all, the broadest united front under which we waged the struggle in apartheid. So I expect these things to happen. We are not angry, we're not bitter about it. I think it just strengthens our resolve to work to resolve these contradictions until they are cast asunder, especially those that detract from our core mission.
Thank you very much. That's Jeremy Vearey, ANC member, anti-apartheid activist, who's currently a Major General in the Police Service of South Africa, just reflecting and sharing with us there more on his views that he expressed during the memorialization of the late Cecil Esau, another ANC struggle stalwart.